Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and have Iya with me here. Did I say your name right? I'm still a little bit...
Yes, ma'am. It is Iya. Iya MNT.
Iya MNT with me here. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I would love for you to introduce yourself. Interview yourself. Here we go. I'm getting those words mixed up, all these interviews I've been doing. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and introduce your work. You're doing some womb-centered work. And I would love for you to share more about it and how you got into it and what womb-centered healing means to you.
Alrighty. Well, I am Iya MNT. Once again, Minty if you're fresh. I am a 22-year-old womb wellness advocate. Okay, so what it is that I do is help a lot of women with their sexual and reproductive organs, making sure they understand that space both emotionally and physically, the problems or issues that they may have to combat, throughout their lifetimes, and why it is that they are faced with those issues. So I provide tools, and I provide tools and just cleansing mechanisms for them. Not necessarily cleansing mechanisms as if these mechanisms is the only thing that cleanses their womb or vaginal space, because the womb and vaginal space is a self-cleansing space in itself. But it just aids that space in its natural cleansing process. And then tools just to help them with their connection with their vaginal space and with their womb space. Mm-hmm. So what womb-centered healing means to me is understanding the womb, number one, physically, understanding the womb mentally, understanding the womb emotionally, so that we can go about knowing why we make the decisions we make and why we have the issues that we have, so that we can heal those things within us, walk a path to show other women how to heal and what it is like to even look like when we are healed, what it is like to go through the journey of healing, and whatever that may entail for each woman, because it's different for every woman, because we all have different experiences in our life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And if you're like most women that I talk to, I'm imagining you've had a personal healing journey that woke you up and made you aware of the need to focus on the womb in the healing journey for women, and the importance of these womb-centered issues or inquiries or practices that you've tried out first on yourself, I'm imagining.
Right.
If it's like most women who get into this line of work, that you had some kind of healing crisis, something that you needed to address, some pain that you were struggling with, and then you discovered remedies, and now you want to share them with other women. So could you share with us that story of your process with that?
Yes, of course. And full permission to be completely vulnerable, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, great. Okay, so I've just come out of a marriage that was almost 4 years, and I ended up getting married very, very young. Mm-hmm. And so we went through a lot of things that young people go through, especially when they get married. Mm-hmm. And I ended up contracting, what is it called? Chlamydia, and as well as bacteria vaginosis, reoccurring yeast infections. That's something that, chlamydia was just a one-time thing, but bacteria vaginosis and yeast infections was reoccurring. It's just something I couldn't understand what was going on with me, why I kept getting these issues after I'm going to the doctor or I'm using the monostats, and it's just like, what's going on? Why am I not healing all the way? If I'm taking medicine, shouldn't that, you know what I'm saying, combat the issue? Why does it keep coming back? Is it ever really healed if it continues to come back? I wanted to learn more. Mm-hmm. As I was going through that physically in my life, I was also going through a spiritual awakening as well. And so I started to learn a lot about how to listen to my inner voice and my intuition, and doing yoga and just really developing practices to help me center myself and really listen to my inner being. And I remember I was doing yoga. I was in the downward facing dog position at this time. And I remember hearing myself tell myself that this is the line of work that I was going to go through, simply because I was taking a look at myself and what it is that I actually do, what I've done my whole life. It's just the patterns that I've done my whole life, which is be a teacher of the things that I learned, or the things that are very important to me, which was music at one point, which it still is. Um, Things in the military, because I am a vet, and just really anything that I learn, I regurgitate it. I'm just a teacher. It's what I do. It's something that's stuck within me. So um, figuring out that the medications that I would get from the GYNs weren't really helping me for a prolonged amount of time, I started to seek natural remedies, because I was learning a lot about how pharmaceutical companies, you know what I'm saying, the things that they do with medicine, it's all just a synthetic version of the real thing. And so I said to myself, well, why not just get the real thing? What is the real thing?
What is the real thing?
What's the real thing? I
What's
want to
the
know
real
what the real
thing?
thing is.
Yeah.
And so I started to go down this journey of figuring out what the real thing was. And my mind was just burst open. It was amazing, because I fell into this world that I had no idea about. Um, Sharing remedies, natural remedies, herbal remedies, of things that you can do just to combat situations that I was dealing with myself. And then I started to learn about different remedies to combat situations that were bigger than what I was dealing with. And so definitely practice them on myself first, because I was learning that in order to be a sufficient teacher or coach or counselor or anything, you must be your first client. How can you really give information off to anyone and you don't have personal experience to relate it to, in order to really have the client to understand that you understand where they're coming from? You see what I'm saying? You have personal experience within this. So I definitely used remedies such as yoni steams and vaginal pearls, depending on after a lot of research. And I healed myself with those specific things, and diet changes and things of that sort. And I wanted to know more. I wanted to know, how are these things working all the way? What's the science behind it? How can I explain this to people correctly? So I started to seek schools, okay, because I wanted to do this with my life. I would always use that one yoga session that I had with myself. I would always reference that and say, I know that this is what I'm going to be doing. I know that this is what I'm going to be doing. What year was this? I believe this was 2015. And I'm just like, how, what can I do? Where can I go to obtain this type of information? And so I ran into a few schools, but I just wasn't in the financial situation to receive or to get that for myself, to invest in myself and put myself where I wanted to be. And all things happen in its own divine timing. So I just let it be. And the opportunity presented itself to me through University Online Training Academy. And I must say that that school burst me open some more, okay, because it just put me in a space to really understand what it is that I wanted to do, how I can relate to other people who have issues that were bigger than mine, or issues that weren't necessarily bigger than mine, but they just weren't my issues. It helped me to be able to understand them on many levels, and be able to speak with them to say, I understand what you're going through. I understand your symptoms. I know what that sounds like. I know what this needs. I understand what regimen you need to be put on and all of that good stuff. So I became certified in July of last year. I was so excited. I completely zoomed through my school and then went back. And the great thing about this school is I have a lifetime access to it.
Mhm.
So I go back all the time, and I'm adding extra notes. If I had my spiral collection, you would see I have so many notebooks, so
Mhm.
much notes to go back
Oh
on,
yeah.
because you have to.
Yeah.
It's so much information. You cannot just store all of this up here. And if you do, it's gonna take a while to sift through those files and
Mhm.
find everything. So yes, I was very excited about, obtaining my certification for this, and allowing myself to be my first client. I was my first client. I started this in 2015. Last year was 2018. So I was my first client for 3 years, trying different remedies, creating things that I knew would help my certain situation, and documenting every single day, documenting the different changes that I would go through when I would use the product that I would use. Of course, these are all natural ingredients that I would put together. And just, I was enjoying learning
Mm.
what I was going to be doing for other people,
Mhm.
going through the process so that I could further have, or just have more information to give to those women about what that process is even like.
Mm.
So
So
that
tell
would be
me,
my answer to that.
yeah, tell me about what's the exact certification called that you received from the university?
It was a certificate of training. That's what's on the certificate, a certificate of training. So I passed the training
The
in order to be,
university training.
yes,
All
University
right.
Womb Wellness Advocate Training. There we go.
Womb wellness advocate training. Okay, good.
Right.
So
University is like the blanket, because there's so
yeah.
much that university offers aside from just being a womb wellness advocate.
So what are some of the like course topics that you took?
Oh, some of the course topics that I took would be, let's see, we studied PCOS. That was definitely something that was big. Fibroids. Let's see, yoni eggs, of course, because that was something that, they were teaching us to be able to incorporate within our businesses. And
Mhm.
so understanding, you see what I'm saying, what eggs were toxic, because people don't realize that you can't ingest every stone.
Mhm.
So some things put off into your body that is very unhealthy to consume.
Mhm.
But yoni eggs, yoni pearls, yoni steams. Let's see.
So did you
Of
learn how to make the pearls yourself?
Well, we didn't learn how to make the pearls ourselves,
Mhm.
but we are given all of the information as to what goes inside of the pearls, or the different herbs that go inside of the pearls, how they pack it, where it is done, videos on how it is done, so that we can see what's going on. Of course, it's an online training academy, so we can't be there firsthand, but she definitely provides um, enough information so that we can wrap our minds around exactly what it is that we would be providing, what it is that we would even be using on ourselves, being that we are our first clients,
Mhm.
before anything. So it didn't teach us how to make the pearls, but it
Mhm.
showed us, you know what I'm saying. Well,
Mhm.
basically, I guess that is teaching us how to make it. We just
Well,
don't
if you
have the
recipe, you might not have the exact recipe. I mean, I imagine there's going to be different recipes for different women
right,
to meet different
right,
women's needs.
right.
Was there an herbalism component to the training where you where you explored what the different functions and properties of the different herbs that you might need for the different conditions that you might be supporting women with?
Yes, there were, and that wasn't necessarily for the yoni pearls, but for the vaginal steams.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we went through the different herbs, of course, just like you said, the different herbs and the component, how they work together, herbs that should not be mixed together, different herbs that are supposed to go into a yoni steam, because you don't just put any type of herb in a
Mm-hmm.
yoni steam. Some things are just not good for
Mm-hmm.
anyone to consume in a specific way.
And
So yes.
for steaming particularly, did you learn how uh, how to assess a woman's needs and the different types of steaming protocols that you might come up with a woman to address her specific needs?
Yes.
And like
And
contraindications, like what are some of the contraindications for steaming in general that you learned about?
what is contraindications?
Contraindication means that it's you don't want to do steaming with somebody if they have
Okay.
this contraindicated um, condition.
Okay. So as far as conditions are concerned, I can't say that I am versed or that we were given information as it pertains to that. We did learn how to do consultations to figure out what it is that a person is going through, if there's any medications that they are on. And the school actually has this resource center that allows us to have an herb versus like I think it's called med herb versus medication chart, basically, where we go
Uh-huh.
in and we type in the specific medication that they're taking, and then the herbs that would be in the yoni steam that would benefit their specific situation, to see if any of those would have negative interactions. We also learned that yoni steaming is not something that should be done while you're on your cycle, or if you have any cuts, or you see what I'm saying, burns or
Mhm.
anything. Let's see, not adding specific things like oils inside of a yoni steam, things such as that. As far as conditions go, though, that's not something that we learned, but that's something that I can bring to her attention, because she's constantly adding things to the courses. No matter
Right.
when, she's
Yeah.
constantly adding things to the courses. So that's something I'll definitely bring up to her.
Well, I'm not aware of any like illness. Well, there's one condition that could be considered, well, it's more of an imbalance than an illness, and that is that I've learned that steaming isn't good for a woman who has intermittent bleeding. So that means if she
Okay.
has more than one period per month, for example, uh,
Okay.
we're supposed to only have one bleeding period per month. And if a
Right.
woman is bleeding in the middle for a good day or more, or even just fresh red blood spotting, then that means already her womb isn't holding the blood the whole month through. And so steaming has the quality, the effect of helping the womb to release the blood. And
Right.
if she's already not able to hold the blood, then that's not really the right direction to go for her, because women can often end up bleeding way too much. And so
Right.
steaming is not indicated for women who are bleeding too much. We don't want those women to bleed more. And just the steam by itself can cause more bleeding than is already happening, or can and so it's more helpful for women who the blood is stuck, right? And we're
Right.
trying to help the blood to come out. And so that's the main one of the main conditions. And then of course we don't want to steam when a woman is pregnant or
Right.
trying
Oh,
to get
definitely.
pregnant, because
Definitely.
again it helps the womb to release things.
Release.
And if we're wanting the egg to implant, then we don't want to be steaming during that post-ovulatory phase if a woman is trying to get pregnant or she already is pregnant. So those are some of the contraindicated things that I was interested in knowing if you learned about. You
Okay.
some of them, but maybe this whole business of the intermittent bleeding might be a topic to bring up with your teacher to share more about
Definitely.
that, because it can be hard, to get a woman's womb to be strong enough. You want to
Right.
strengthen the womb so that it
Right.
hold the blood when it's supposed to hold the blood, and then release the blood when it's supposed to release the blood. And there can be all kinds of reasons why a woman isn't strong and her womb's not strong enough to hold the blood. uh, um, and so it's really good to know what those conditions are and know who you can refer a person to. Like,
Right.
if somebody is bleeding a lot, if they're having 2 full length periods a month, or they're bleeding for 2 weeks or more out of the month, large amounts of blood, then they really need support getting their whole system back into balance. And so
Right.
that can be nutritional support, that can be herbal support. I send women like that to acupuncturists, who
Yeah.
can help bring, they have strong herbs that can help bring, and then I'm learning more about herbs that they can take orally, not steaming,
Okay.
but orally, to to help the bleeding to stop and to slow down and to nourish the womb to be strong enough. So
it's great that you mentioned the acupuncture,
mm-hmm,
or acupuncturist,
mm-hmm,
because that's also something that we learn about,
mm-hmm,
to help. You see what I'm saying,
mm-hmm,
with
yeah,
womb wellness, in the 101 courses, so 101, 102, 103 course. And another thing that I know, a female should not see during, is when she is experiencing an outbreak of, or a herpes outbreak. It's
an
not,
infection right
yeah,
now.
anything
It's
like
not
that.
good.
It's not a good thing to steam.
Yeah, because it's already a hot, damp,
Hmm.
moist condition, right? So we don't
Hmm.
necessarily want to add more hot, damp, moist,
Right.
right, to
It's
that,
gonna make it worse.
right? Good. So beautiful. So you've learned all of this information in your university schooling and this certification, and then through your own healing process. And so I'm curious as to, um, you said you were leaving a marriage, or you, and I'm curious as to how this healing process, for example, for your chronic infections and the end of the marriage corresponded. Did that happen at the same time? Were you still
Wow.
married
Actually,
when you healed from that, or did you heal after you left the marriage?
well, I actually healed during the marriage, and then I found myself right back in the loop, because if your male partner is not doing the same things that you were doing, both internally and externally, you will receive again what it is that you have gotten rid of, because it is in the partner who you are sharing fluids with, sharing emotions with, sharing experiences with, because womb related issues are not just physical issues. They start, in a place that is not physical, first. So during the process of, my healing, my womb healing, of course, both physical and energetically, I found myself wanting to bring my husband, of course, or my ex-husband with me along the healing journey,
Mm-hmm.
because if I'm healing, I want everyone around me who I love dearly, and those who I don't even know, to heal, but
Mm-hmm.
especially those in my circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those who contribute to my growth. And so as I saw myself continue to heal and continue to grow and continue to have will the willpower to push through this healing process, because a lot of times we can get discouraged with life coming and adding all this extra stuff. We can get discouraged with our healing process and just want to stop. So with continuing to see that my willpower was growing and that I was putting in so much of me into my healing, and then not really seeing that happening with my spouse, I saw the imbalance. I saw where we were starting to become separate instead of one, in our healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we can hold each other back or hold each other down, not just necessarily one person. A lot of times we can feed into the comfort, or let's see, what's the word that I'm looking for? We can feed into the being stagnant, the stagnation. And that's
Even the
something that I
complacency, it would be kind of like,
yes,
if somebody's complacent because they're comfortable, and
yes,
they can rest in the stagnation because you're supporting them there.
yes.
Yeah.
And so here I am trying to break out of my comfort zone
Mm-hmm.
and battling. First of all, breaking out of your comfort zone is not the easiest thing in the world. So that's already a task. And then not having the full support of my spouse doing the same thing or putting enough effort into it, you see. And so I would find myself in and out of these situations, my womb related situations, physical womb related situations. I would find myself in and out of those yeast infections or a bacterial vaginosis, in and out, in and out, in and out. And not just because of those physical, things, but because of the emotional, the inside, the spiritual, just the growth. I decided, just through listening to my inner voice. And it took me a year, because when I went back in my journals, remember I told you I am a journaler, like to
Mm.
the T. When I went back in my journals, I had saw, after I had spoken with my husband about this, we were very, very open. And as it related to our feelings,
Mhm.
like monthly, we would come to each other and ask, okay, what's going on? How are we doing? What are we missing? What do we need to do more of? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to pay more attention to? And so when it got to that point where I let him know I really need to let go for my own healing, not necessarily because you're just imperfect in whatever way, or you just do not make me happy, because the things that I would ask for you to do in certain aspects, you would actually start to do. But it just, our lives were separating, as in terms, it was just something that was supposed to happen. And in doing that, right before I left, of course, because I know what to do to heal myself with these situations, I did that. And we decided to continue to be separate in interacting with each other. So no sex, no interacting in that type of way, just support on a human level,
Mhm.
and supporting each other, growing in our own separate ways. I still check on him from time to time. He still checks on me from time to time. And yeah, that's basically how we went about that. I was really just having to listen to my inner voice, because when because of the way that society is set up, when you marry someone, you marry someone. This is forever. This is until we die. At least that's what our vows are when we are there in front of the person who is marrying us. And so no matter what the situation was, no matter what was going on, period, it was in my mind that I'm going to stick through this. I'm going to stay. I'm not going to leave. But that wasn't self-love at all. I can't be a person who gives self-love sessions and not give self-love to myself. I literally have all of these answers that I'm giving to these women, but here I am not practicing it entirely. And
Mhm.
so I had this like come to Iya moment where it was just like, you have to practice what you preach to the T,
Mhm.
despite, and really be honest with yourself and allow yourself to accept the truth of the matter, rather than what you would like the truth to be, or what you have been telling yourself the truth is. So it was really just me having to listen to my inner voice, and not only listen to my inner voice, because at one point I was listening and I was asking myself, what do I do to release myself from this situation? What do I do to move forward? So not only did it take me listening to my inner voice, but actually making the action,
Mhm.
going, following through with what it was that my inner voice was telling me, um, leaving that fear behind and just going for it. And so that definitely aided in my healing process, his healing process.
Mhm.
We have grown tremendously since our separation. And it's just something that we really needed to do that's
Mhm.
helped us both, really.
Mhm. Beautiful. And so, do you remember a particular moment where something happened, you became aware of something about yourself or your ex-husband that made it really clear to you that your inner voice was telling you you need to move away from this relationship in order to proceed with your healing process? Do you remember a particular instance or circumstance that just made it crystal clear?
So, yes, it's actually kind of like a series. Maybe it's not even a series. Let me just gather my words. We had my ex-husband and I had such a hard time with being able to keep a residence, or a residential place, for as long as the lease agreement. And within the course of 4 years, we had lived in 7 different places.
Wow.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Credit is not good, but that's okay. All things will change. All things happen in its own divine timing. But I realized that this is when it happened. It was after my birthday. After my birthday last year, we had to leave our last house. It was the first home, our first house we had ever rented, and we were very excited. We were like, we're doing this thing. We're paying rent on time. We have our jobs. We seem centered. Everything seems cool. We have a nice meditation room. We have a backyard, front yard. Everything's just awesome, right? And something happened to where we had to lose that place, and we ended up moving in with his sister. And there I allowed myself to just really look at our relationship, really look at our journey and see the cycles. Because there's always a cycle. Because if you don't learn a lesson, it's just going to restart so that you can learn that lesson. And so I identified the cycles in many different aspects, not just financially or anything like that. Because in the last place that we lost, we were really doing everything that we needed to keep the house. It was just a series of like unfortunate events that caused that to happen. But still, it was still that cycle of losing a place, getting up, not having stability, deep root chakra issues, a lot of fear. And so I'm looking at these cycles and I'm asking myself, is this really what you want to continue to go through? And if not, what is it that is happening that is keeping you in this cycle? Okay. And so what are you not listening to? What are you not paying attention to? What message from spirit are you just not paying attention to? Because we get messages from spirit all of the time. We just choose to go the other way because it is pleasing to, I guess, our flesh body or our ego or what have you. It's pleasing to that part of us, rather than just listening to spirit. Because sometimes when spirit tells you what to do, in your mind, that's not really pleasing. I didn't want to divorce my husband. That man was my best friend. Okay. Still is in a way. And that's just not something that I wanted to do. I did not want to be obedient in that way. So I had gotten a deck of tarot cards. I do offer tarot readings. And I said, well, let me ask what it is that needs to be done in this situation. Actually, before I even got to that point, my ex-husband said, let's do a reading on our relationship. And the reading definitely told us that we were going to split, that we were going to break up, that everything was going to end. But wow. Yeah, right. And
which cards did you pull in that reading?
I do not remember. I only pulled 3 cards. I don't remember the first 2, but I remember the last one, and it was the Lover's card in reverse. And that's just, it's over basically. Like it's a very short description from my book. It says end of relationship, hurt feelings. And so, or end of romance, hurt feelings, to be exact, from what's in my book. And so, as I was telling you, I was having issues with my vaginal space, reoccurring BV and reoccurring yeast infections. So when I saw that card, I said, are we going to break up? And he's like, no, we're married. We're not breaking up. And we made it a totally different meaning in our heads because we didn't want to believe what those cards were saying at all. We were like, maybe it's just saying it's going to hurt our feelings to not interact with each other in that way, but we have to stop having sex until you are completely healed and I am completely healed, right? And so we were just like, that's what this means. Yeah, we're just not even going to believe we were in denial. But we continue to live, we continue to grow and go through our journey, and assessing my emotions, assessing my reoccurring thoughts and about the relationship, about myself, about my situation, our situation. It really started to become apparent to me that I didn't want to be in the relationship anymore, and that the relationship was not serving me, and that the relationship was hindering us more than growing us at this point. Because in this relationship, we grew tremendously. We married at 18 and 19 years old. So I am 22. I'm about to be 23 this year. And we grew tremendously. So we really thought like, this is going to be the thing. Like, this is, of course, this is what we need to be. And look at all this growth. Look at all this beauty that has come from the relationship. All of the changes that we have gone through together. So I allowed myself to stop denying how I really felt so that I could protect his feelings. Because really, I was protecting his feelings. That's the main thing that stopped me from saying I need to leave this relationship for my own emotional health and for my own spiritual growth. And that this really doesn't have anything to do with you per se, but everything to do with me and the way that I love myself, getting to know myself more, because we married so young. There was so much about life that we had no idea about that we learned together. And I was I am still very appreciative and honored to have him in my life to go through those things and grow through those things. But I came to realize, and he did too after a while, because even after I told him that, oh, no, I need to put this on the charger. Excuse me.
Okay, so carrying on.
Okay, so I allowed myself to really understand that I wasn't giving myself the self-love that I required, and that I needed to leave the situation that we were in. And I did let him know. I let him know towards the end of the year what was going on, where my mind was. And we tried for a little bit to see if that was the direction that we were going to go in, exactly like this is really going to happen. And we stayed together to heal through the process of leaving each other. We stayed together for about 6 months, just healing, sometimes crying, sometimes just holding each other, talking about the negative emotions that we had about it, talking about our fears. Before I know I'm jumping around a lot, so pardon me for that. But before I told him, I did readings. It was one night I just did so many readings. I was just asking questions. I just need to know what's going to happen if I stay. What happens to me if I stay? What happens to him if I stay? What happens to me if I leave? What happens to me if I go? You see what I'm saying? What is this relationship going to be like as a unit if we stay? Chaos. You will be ripped apart from something that does not serve you. Or when I say that, I mean, chaos will enter into your life heavier and heavier the more you hold on to what does not serve you.
Wow.
So that you can realize all I have to do is let go of this one thing, and this chaos is now released. And so once I saw that, of course, I gave myself a great cry. And when my ex-husband came home from work that day, I remember grabbing one of the crystals that were closest to me. I need support. I don't know how I'm going to get this to come out of my throat. How am I going to say this? What words do I even say? Because at this point, it's not like we were just quarreling all the time, or we just hated each other. And so at that point, he was a little confused. What's going on? Why are we doing this? But I told him, and as we continue to go through the healing process, before I left the state that we were in to come to the state that I am now in, we really came to the understanding of why it is that we needed to come together and why it was that we needed to split. So it was an incredible healing process. The whole relationship that I had with my ex-husband was a growing and healing process.
Wow.
That was it was very beneficial for me. No matter the pain that we endured, everything, all of it was a lesson. I regret nothing, but it has brought about so much healing. He was such a huge key to my healing and growing process. Even childhood traumas and things of that sort. We just healed through a lot with each other. And I'm so grateful for him and the journey that we had together. But yeah.
Wow. And so it sounds like this process of finding peace and coming to terms with the reality that for mysterious and possibly some obvious or clear reasons, your relationship wasn't meant to continue. I'm sure that that's a very, for many people, a very difficult thing to come to terms with, even if they have obvious reasons, like they're fighting, they don't get along, they don't, want to be, when you don't have that, that almost makes it even more difficult if there's some inner guidance saying you need to go in different directions. I can imagine that would have been very challenging to come to terms with, especially because it sounds like your husband was growing with you. It wasn't like one of these marriages where the husband isn't interested in personal growth at all or doing any kind of healing processes at all. I've had those. I was engaged to a man like that for a period of time. And that's when I was having my chronic yeast infections and things like that. And he was not interested in changing his diet or even getting tested, even though it was very clear that he had, a rash, around his sacrum and like that. And it was like, okay, you've got some yeast things too, but he wasn't willing to do any kind of healing process. But it sounds like your husband, you said at one point that he would, if you asked him to do something, that he would do it. And I imagine that was the case even with, would you look into taking these herbs with me, or would you look into making a dietary change? Was he willing to do those types of things too? Or
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was willing to do every single thing he could have done to keep me. Mm-hmm. And I had to help him understand that it wasn't him. I'm not leaving because of you.
Yeah, there was something.
I'm leaving
for you to do, something more for you to do outside of being in a marriage. And that makes such perfect sense given the nature of our life cycles. When we're in our early 20s, there's a phase of feminine development where a woman, to really develop, needs a time where she's not beholden to any man. That was the original definition of the word virgin.
Wow.
It didn't necessarily mean that she hadn't had sex. It meant that she wasn't beholden to any man, that she was independent in and of herself, and was self-determining and empowered to be her full self. She's no longer a child, right? She's a fully grown adult woman, but she's not joined with any man. So virgin births were simply birthed by women who weren't married.
Right.
Didn't mean they didn't have sex.
Right.
It just meant that they weren't married to any particular man. And so that's a powerful phase of feminine development, which when you get married at 18 or 19, you didn't really have a very long period to do that, to really mature into that. And it sounds like, of course, if you're going to be a woman who helps other women with their full development, their full womb wellness, then that kind of, in our 20s, we really need to explore lots of different things, potentially explore what it means like to be in relationship, what kinds of relationships we want, what kind of sexuality do we want to explore. And, I'm certainly not a big proponent of promiscuity or anything like that, but having the freedom to have a conscious awareness of and a choice around who we're with and when, and following our inner guidance around that is a really powerful part of human development in general. Women, men, any gender needs to really, I feel, for our own growth, have that time of exploration and and self-determination. So I just really want to honor you and um, commend you for having the courage to listen to that inner voice that was telling you this is something that you need to do for your growth and development, even though all the messages from society and even our own emotions, emotions might have been fighting against that, which is totally understandable too. I mean, it's terrifying to be out there on your own, you know. It really is, you know, in the dating realms, and you know, and even not even just being on your own, even if you're not dating, you know, going home at night to an empty house, or
Right. Sleeping alone.
sleeping alone, all of those things. When you've been with somebody, it can feel
Every single day.
yes, and not having that bond, that close intimate bond right there to lean on, because I can imagine that that is something that might have kept you in your comfort zone, right? Is leaning on that a little bit. And
Definitely.
yeah.
It definitely kept me in my comfort zone. And you hit the nail on the head when you were saying, of course, figuring out what it is that you want.
Mm-hmm.
You can't figure out what it is that you want when you've chosen one thing very, very early and not had a chance to figure out or experience anything else. And one thing, one point that I made to him was, when we married each other, we came together as two Baptist Christian children, basically, teenagers, basically. And throughout the course of our marriage, we ended up leaving religion and learning things about spirituality and subscribing to different systems, and just learning different things. And I would use that as a reference point to him to help him understand, you see how we thought one thing was one way because of what we were taught. And we've basically been taught that this is how relationships are supposed to happen. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to put up with if you marry a person or if you're with a person. And I had to help him realize that just how we did that with religion, we have to do this in relationships. What is it that we really want in a relationship? How do we know that we want this in a relationship? Have we had this in a relationship? How do we know that we don't want this in a relationship? Have we experienced that? What will we and what will we not put up with? Why? You know, and what is it? What are your desires? Do you know your desires? Do you know what you like? That whole, like you said, time of finding and exploring, finding yourself. And so another thing is I kept telling him I can't fully love a person if I do not fully love myself. I cannot fully love myself if I do not know myself. I have to go on the journey of knowing and understanding myself fully, and allowing myself to be who I am without any constraints or limitations of someone else to help them remain comfortable. And when I say that, I mean holding parts of myself back, because if I be myself completely in this way, it makes my spouse uncomfortable. That's not fair. It's not fair to do that to anyone. It's not fair to dim your light because your spouse or partner cannot take it because it's just too bright for them. You should be able to be who you are completely in your own entirety. And if someone wants to relate with you in that way, it should be something that they're able to accept. And it doesn't make them uncomfortable. If it makes them uncomfortable, maybe it's something about themselves that they don't completely accept, or that they're not completely comfortable with. And who says that you have to conform to someone else's comfortability when you can just conform to your own, or conform to your own just self, conform to just the way that you are, being who you are. A lot of times we'll draw ourselves back, we'll dim our light, we'll just be less of ourselves because some people can't take you being your whole entire self. And so that's another thing I had to put my foot down and say, I'm not going to continue to not be myself because this part of myself is something that makes you uncomfortable, or this part of myself is something that you do not approve of. This is who I was before we married, or this is who this is something about myself that I've always loved before we were married, but I have to tone it down when I'm around you. Then you start to feel prisoner. Then you start to feel trapped. That's not self-love. That's not self-love at all. I can't love you more than I love myself. So I definitely had to make it apparent that I have to go on the journey of loving myself. And of course, that's figuring out who you are first. So, yes.
Yeah. Well, and it feels like where you are in your early 20s, that you have a good deal of figuring out who you are to
Yes.
do, right? And so it's like really imperative that you do that, because you can't miss that phase, right? And then speaking to some of our older listeners, like myself included, and just to give you like a little glimpse into the future, is that we have various times throughout our lives when we realize, oh my gosh, I thought I knew who I was, and now I'm not sure I know who I am anymore. And so my husband and I have been going through that together, actually.
That's
another
beautiful.
Like a second time round, like in our 40s, it's like, oh, we don't know who we are or like who we thought we were completely changes. It's called midlife crisis, right? Who you think you are completely changes. Everything that you built up on who you discovered or thought you learned that you were in your 20s and developed in your 30s, oftentimes in your 40s you can have a moment, like a period of time, 10 years or more, of wait a second, maybe that's, maybe there's new parts of me that need to develop that require these old ways to not be true anymore. Everything completely turns topsy-turvy. And then, but then in this, other phase, especially if you have a well-developed relationship over a longer period of time, and especially if you're having this feeling that you're meant to stay in that relationship, like me and my husband, or that you want to, then there can be this quality of like, oh, what if the things that, like my husband's limitations or my partner's limitations, are actually a relief to me because I can't do all of it.
Yes.
Right? So I can't explore everything that I want to explore.
Right.
And so that narrows me down to really be able to dig into the things that fit within the partnership.
Right.
And then that becomes, instead of a prison, that becomes guide rails in the wilderness, right? That becomes a path in the wilderness instead of a prison, right? And
that's beautiful.
Amongst the infinite possibilities, it's a beacon that says, and then we can, because in any relationship, there's going to be differences of opinion, differences of inclination, differences in comfort zones, in the infinite realms of interaction and intimacy. There's going to be friction spots, right? Where it's you're not comfortable with what your husband might want to explore, or he's not comfortable, or what your wife might want to explore. Whoever it is and whatever it is, there's going to be those friction spots. And so then once you've explored, like I didn't get married for the first time till I was 42, 43, 44, 44. In my 40s. So I had a very well developed time of finding myself on my own, independent of anyone else. So now my challenge is almost the polar opposite of yours, which is, how can I devote myself to intimacy and see intimacy and partnership, and create intimacy and partnership that's actually beneficial for my development, my self-love, and how I take care of myself, and not believe in that old story that intimacy and partnership would be detrimental to that, because I grew up with that story, because I saw that with my parents. other, right? Because they got married, they got together when they were
Really young.
really young, right? And they didn't
Yeah.
ever find themselves. And I didn't do that. I got together with my husband in the 40s. And both of us had really, and in your 40s, often you have to find yourself again, right?
Right.
So I just wanted to add some longevity to this conversation.
Oh, thank you. That
For
that was beautiful.
to just show that we can go through these developmental phases, and sometimes we can go through them together, and sometimes we have to go through them on our own. And for each person, it feels like there's a mysterious inner guidance that comes up, because there's plenty of people that do get married young, that have the kind of relationship that you have, that get the other message from their tarot cards or whatever reading they're doing, or their inner guidance that says, yes, it's difficult. Part of me doesn't really want to be here and do this. And yet part of me is telling me this is where I need to be.
Right.
And they listen, and if they listen to that, or if they didn't listen to that and they left, then they might be feeling that later, or get back together later, right?
Right.
So the mysteries of relationship and what brings us together and what has us going our separate ways are infinite. So thank you
Right.
so much for giving us a glimpse inside your process around that, and how womb-centered healing took part and took place in that whole process, because that's a powerful aspect of it that often goes ignored and untended to. So I'm
Right.
really appreciating your attention to that, and I'm sure that whatever you learned and whatever your husband learned in that process is going to benefit any partners that the two of you have in the future, for sure,
Yes.
because you both learn tremendous amounts, and it's going to benefit you in your future relationships with yourself and anyone else. So
Right.
I appreciate that. And so it sounds like you are a womb wellness advocate, and are making yourself more and more available to support other women through these types of healing processes. So is there a way that uh, listeners might be able to get in touch with you if they want to talk to you more about that?
Yes, they can find me. You all can find me on Facebook, my business Facebook page at Iya's Yoni Temple. Iya is spelled Iya. You want to add the apostrophe and then the S. Then you type in Yoni Temple and I will come up. You like the page, you can private message me there, or you can send me an email at yonitempleclients@gmail.com.
Beautiful. So that's how I got in touch with you about
Yes.
getting it to be a speaker on the Womb Centered Healing Temple podcast. So thank you. And if anyone listening would like to learn more about the Womb Centered Healing Temple, you can go to wombcenteredhealingtemple.com. Right now, we are preparing for our next online summit, which is a free summit of gathering of guest speakers from all over the world. This next summit is called the Embodied Shakti Summit, and we will be talking about how we embody Shakti, or creative feminine spiritual energy, in our lives and work and our relationships and in our womb wellness practices. So you can sign up there at wombcenteredhealing.com for the Embodied Shakti Summit, as well as to hear about future offerings, events, and opportunities in the Womb Centered Healing Temple. So that's about it. Are there any last words of insight, wisdom, or blessing that you would like to share with us before we go? Yeah.
Continue or find a way to listen to your inner voice. It's always there. She's always speaking. We have made a habit of ignoring her to better please our ego or our flesh body, but your inner voice knows the way that you need to go. Even when you're looking around and you're being distracted by this and that, Your inner voice knows the way that you need to go. And even if it doesn't seem like that's where you should be going, listen to it, give it a try. You could just be afraid. And on the other side of fear is amazing things, opportunities, growth, happiness. I can't express it enough. Listen to your inner voice. Find your inner voice. Learn to decipher between the different voices that you hear, because you'll hear there's so many different thoughts that go in through our heads. It really takes the practice of listening to your thoughts, listening and knowing what you feel like when you get these different thoughts, so that you can identify with, or you can identify which one of those voices, which one of those thought patterns, what type of dialogue comes from your inner voice. So find that inner voice and listen to it, because it knows the way, despite what you think you may know. There's so much, despite what you think you may know. Listen to that inner voice.
And this is a big theme that we discuss on other podcast episodes with other guest speakers, as well as all of the Embodied Shakti Summit speakers. We come back to this theme over and over again of all the different ways that we can decipher that inner voice, where it's coming from. We talk about the head voice, the heart voice, and the womb voice. Although I think that's the first time I said it exactly like that, because the womb, there's different qualities for where that inner voice might be coming from. It's very easy to get wrapped up. I know for myself, I work with my inner child voices a lot, and if anyone has suffered from trauma in early childhood, or even just emotionally difficult circumstances growing up, can be quite traumatic for a child, or an infant, or even in the womb, in the fetus. When we're a fetus, when we're in the womb, that what's normal emotional ups and downs for a mother can be traumatic for the baby. So we develop voices based on those traumatic, distressed, emotional states, and then they can recur and be voices inside of us. But that's why what you're saying is so important, because if you feel how you feel when you hear that particular voice that really repeats itself, and you always feel anxious, or you feel a certain quality to it, you can start to get to know that voice. Okay, this is my inner child. It's not necessarily that I need to do what they're saying. It's that I need to tend to my inner child's needs. And like a child, they might be saying, I want the Cocoa Puffs, but what they really need is some sweetness and tenderness and care. That's just one simplistic example. But because if we just let our traumatized inner child run the show, that's not going to produce the kind of happiness that you're talking about either.
Right.
So I'm glad that we could make that distinction, because getting to know our inner voices and knowing the qualities and how to tend to each voice that arises as a beloved guest to be cared for is such a beautiful blessing for all of our listeners. Thank you so much for bringing that to us today. And I guess that's all for now. We'll just hold that vision for all of us, that we can have that clarity and attention to our inner world and how that affects our life and our loved ones. So blessings on us all, and until next time, that's all for now.